We need you to look into
Oh,
that.
sorry.
Hello, everyone. This is Kevin Morrison. I'm the Cook County Commissioner here in the 15th District, representing the northwest suburbs of Cook County. I want to first and foremost thank everyone who's tuning in live. Just a reminder for those of you out there, you could post questions with our incredible panel in the live comments, and we'll address them as soon as we get to the discussion portion. A special thanks to everyone who may be watching this recording as well. This is an incredibly important moment, and that's why I'm happy to help host this important conversation, especially after the fact with the murder of George Floyd and the movement that is taking place across this country. This discussion today is so important because it's not enough not to be racist. We all must work toward being anti-racist. And while we must say the words Black Lives Matter and Black trans lives matter incredibly loudly, we also must back that up with action, especially elected officials and public servants charged with serving the public. Because as we have painfully seen, for Black residents and other people of color, many have lost their life or experienced violence at the hands of public servants. The generational pain and trauma the Black community experiences is something I will never personally be able to comprehend. The pain and anger over the injustices and history of racism in our country is justified and deserves to be heard loud and clear. I stand in support of those expressing their pain and anger out in the streets and calling for an end to police brutality, white supremacy, and racism. I'm committed to listen more, learn more, and actively work with Cook County government to champion anti-racist ideas and policies. Part of my commitment as a white elected official is using this platform to pass the mic and uplift the voices of Black and Latinx leaders in our communities. That's why I'm so grateful to these incredible guests that we have here today. Last year, I started a Cook County committee on addressing bias, equity, and cultural competency with internal and external stakeholders to guide some of the recommendations of what Cook County could be doing better in terms of equity. The top recommendations across the board was to have a dedicated position and hopefully eventually a whole office dedicated to equity. I'm so proud that position has become a reality, and we have the very best person to lead us. It's my honor to welcome my co-host and Cook County's Director of Equity and Inclusion, Denise Barreto, to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her background and her position with Cook County. Denise, we are so happy to have you here today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here on day 33 of being at the county. I started on May 26th, and how I like to introduce myself is pretty simple. I come to the county after spending a decade as an entrepreneur where most of my clients were local government agencies. I worked with over 45 government agencies throughout the state of Illinois over the last 10 years. The Minnesota, the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So the George Floyd and Fernando Castile, all of those cases are very close to me because Ramsey County has been a client along with lots of municipalities up there, the Department of Corrections, Department of Natural Resources. And all of my work that I had done as an entrepreneur has really led me to this moment. And how this moment even got rolling was because about 11 years ago, I ran for and won local office out in McHenry County. And as a 30-something young woman with, married with children running for office, I like to take credit for all this wave of women of color that you see running for office today, childbearing age. Because when I ran for office, there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me or even close to my age. So those are the things I bring to this role is a perspective of being an elected and working as a legislator, as a person creating policy. Two is the entrepreneur. This position has never existed before. In the 189 years that Cook County has been around, There has never been a position like this. And so who better than an entrepreneur? Because entrepreneurs, what we do is we build and we create. So I am so excited to be here. And I particularly love the Northwest suburbs as I lived there for 11, 12 years, have served there, have many clients there. And I'm just excited to be part of, like, it's my job. Yes, it's my job to lead equity, but I'm going to say something that I say in every meeting when I introduce myself. Equity is something that belongs to every person in every role in Cook County. Okay. So I want it clear that I'm the coach, I'm the facilitator, I'm the subject matter expert, but in no way, shape, or form am I going to own equity for our county. My job is to build the capacity of everybody who works in the county to be able to extend equity. And my biggest job right now, the urgency, is really tying racial equity to our policy roadmap. We're about, I think, 18 months into our policy roadmap, and that is all about delivering specific type of communities, open communities, healthy communities, safe and thriving communities, vital communities, and all those aspects of life that we want to improve in Cook County. It's going to be my job to help us deliver those with a racial equity lens. So thank you, Kevin, for giving me the opportunity to join you today as the co-host, and I look forward to serving the county.
Denise, we are so happy to have you here today. Next up, a true friend of mine and a leader out here, Christina Castro, the state senator of the 22nd District. We are so happy to have you here today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for organizing this, Denise. Denise did some work here in the city of Elgin, so I'm very excited to be able to collaborate with her as we have these very difficult discussions, because they are very difficult discussions, but much needed discussions. I think one of the things when you look at what has been going on, and then as well as add COVID, it is really showing the social inequities that have been in existence for so long. And we really need to rethink how we approach a lot of these issues, from how we reform, do police reform, to how we put more economic investment into a lot of these, low income impacted communities, and making sure that we start to rethink a lot of these issues. And I look forward to this discussion. As a member of the Latino caucus, we have been supportive of our members of the Black caucus, and we will be working with them to address a lot of these much needed issues. It's been a long time. I mean, we've always fought for funding and different aspects for our communities. And, it's a conversation that needs to be had. And for some members in the General Assembly, trying to help them understand what, the racial disparities are. It's a tough conversation, but many of them have been very open to learning about it, to hearing, and many have been very receptive to help. So these conversations, one of many conversations I hope we all continue to have, because the more we talk about it, the more we can educate folks on what those impacts are.
I would love to introduce our other guest, who is also a local municipality member, and I am excited to meet him virtually for the first time, Trustee Herb Porter from the village of Hanover Park. Would you introduce yourself and welcome to our session?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Denise. It is truly my honor and pleasure to meet you. I've heard great things about the work that you've done, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future. Commissioner Morrison, we go back to the beginning of your tenure with the county, and I look forward to us continuing to work together to resolve and forward some of the issues that are so vital to our community. And Senator Castro, you're my girl. So thank you. Thank you for all that you do for us. I hold you in the highest esteem, and I'm glad to be counted as someone that I can call on and get the type of support that we need. I am an elected official, a trustee for Hanover Park. I've been in this position serving my second term. And I'm really thankful that during this time that I am here to present a voice for the African American community. I belong to the National Black Caucus of Local Elected Officials, which is a committee and a group for the National League of Cities. And as such, I've been involved in many meetings, both before COVID shut down, but also virtually, as we have discussed issues that pertain to the African American community. And I think that we have been endeavoring to come up with solutions and recommendations to local officials that will help us navigate through these troubling times. So thank you for including me in this conversation. And without any further ado, I'll turn this back over to our host and moderator.
Thank you so much, Trustee Porter. It's so great to have you here, and I greatly appreciate your friendship. I'm really excited about this panel that we have here today. I know that they are all going to bring great voices and insight to this conversation. I just want to thank again everyone who's tuning in live. If you have any questions for our incredible panel, please place those in the live comments, and we'll be happy to get to them. We're about to start our discussion section. But I do want to start off, and I'm going to start off with you, Trustee. But I'm just curious, what are some of the top priorities for policy change that you're hearing from your constituents in response to the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and far too many Black individuals killed by police recently?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think as we have held two previous virtual meetings, we had a virtual town hall, Piece Together Our Community, which I co-hosted with Trustee Charmaine Shahjahan. And then we followed that up with a town hall meeting, a workshop for the board where we discussed some of the questions that came up. And some of the things that are being presented to us in terms of policy issues is looking at the structure of how we engage in policing in our communities. I think that what is becoming kind of evident to me is that our policing policies and procedures have been built on an idea that they operate with force, and they operate on a premise of fear, a fear-based involvement, engagement with the community, which doesn't always foster trust. And I think that what we need to do is to make the shift from a fear-based policy to a trust-based policy, because if you have a community that is operating in fear, I think it hinders the cooperation that you need to have the community involved in making sure that our environments are safe for everyone and that they are constructive to raising families, to holding businesses, conducting business, raising families, and having a safe environment to live in. So I think that, that's one of the things that has come forward. And what we want to do is take a look at how do our police engage our community. Are they walking the beat? Are they meeting out and shaking hands and getting involved with the community? What is their presence? And so, we've been talking about that, and I think that's probably at the top of the list, because I think when you can get away from that fear-based ideology as how police departments operate and move toward more of a trust, then that fosters respect. And ultimately, I think what the police want is respect. But I don't think that getting it through fear-based practices is really the way to go.
No, I greatly appreciate that. And I would like to pose the same question to you, Senator. What have you been hearing from constituents? I know that in the General Assembly, the Black Caucus has been having many conversations about potential policy changes. I'm sure that the Latinx Caucus is also in discussions about how to combat racism here in the state. What have you been hearing?
So we've been hearing a lot of different things, and we are allowing our brothers and sisters in the Black Caucus to lead a lot of these conversations, but we also have been very supportive and helpful. I can tell you, obviously, the biggest one is police accountability, and making sure officers are accountable when they do step over that line. They should be held accountable. They should also be charged, as you've seen in some of these cases. And we should not forget those folks' name. We should say their name and say it, and really remind ourselves that we need to really refocus on how we re-examine police funding. You know, everyone hears the word defund the police. That is not what they mean by that. It does not mean we take funding. That does not mean we eliminate the police. So let's address that misconception. What it means is let's re-examine how we fund the police. Should they be mental health workers, or should they be in schools? I mean, that's a big conversation that has come up, right? And I am a big champion of social workers. I have a bill that would help educate more social workers, because I think that's what you need at schools: mental health professionals, social workers. So I think that those are some of the issues that we are looking at when it comes to that particular, when it comes to the police. I'm also working with and having very frank discussions with some of our council members in Elgin as they're presenting a lot of these issues. They're keeping me informed, because I want them to explain to me some of the things that are going on from a municipal standpoint. Because one thing is, it's very different out here in the suburbs and how policing is looked at. Denise would know, and a lot of her work. And so I think one of the things is going back to community policing, maybe requiring police officers to live within the community that they serve. That way they get to know the folks in the community. Elgin had a very good model, but there is no requirement for any officer to live in the city limits. They can live everywhere else. I think that would bring a different perspective and help address a lot of that tension. Again, it goes back to what Trustee Porter said: trust, right? Trust and getting to know an officer. And I think we could do a lot more of that. Also, you know, Elgin has talked about a police accountability, police and fire accountability board that they're trying to implement. So there are a lot of different things that they're looking at, as well as the use of force. Should they use tear gas or rubber bullets? And I think those are some of the conversations that are having at the state level. Maybe eliminating chokeholds, the use of chokeholders. When's deadly force allowed? Is there a way to de-escalate? And so I think these are a lot of broad conversations that we're having, and looking forward to bring some of those ideas. And I continue to work with all my trustees as we are kind of contemplating what legislation is going to look like.
So I would love to jump in on my thoughts on this too. When you say what are top priorities, of course, use of force policies obviously makes sense. The accountability piece, but I want to go back to, you know, police get a ton of training for a lot of things. There's a lot of compliance training. There's a lot of, and I have participated in bias training for police. And I will say, if I had to do over again in some of the cases that including Elgin, it's funny because on one hand, you want the police to be like everyone else in the community. Part of what I think happens is police have their set of rules that they play by, and that doesn't necessarily, you know, translate into other parts. So I definitely always took the approach that whatever bias training I'm giving the rest of the organization, we should give that to the police too. And clearly the police aspect of it is going to be customized to what their, you know, to what their needs are. But specifically focus bias training, because one of the things, and this is part of what the narratives are, because, you know, sometimes what the narrative is matters more than what actually happens, right? And so I'll give you an example. Like, you hear people say things all the time about, you know, people are more concerned about police killing Black people than Black people killing Black people. But you never, I mean, 85% of white people that are killed in homicides are killed by other white people, yet you've never heard a term of white on white crime. And so there's lots and lots of nuanced things related to the way we talk about policing, the way we talk about crime, that I think can also help, right? The way that we talk about the interactions and the way we talk about the data. I think that's the other thing. Black and brown folks have been criminalized. And when the data is reported, it always is reported in a way that, you know, justifies the extra stops. I see someone asked in the chat, you know, why are Black and brown people stopped more? Well, part of it's because of the stories that we allow our police departments to proliferate and put out there. If you put out stories all the time about what the interactions with the police are and that they're higher with Black people, then you have created a situation where they're justified in stopping us over and over and over again. Instead of us looking at, well, let's look at all the police stops and let's look at all the citations, and but there's just ways that I believe the reporting of data, training, I could go on and on, but those are the things I think that municipalities need to focus on, because ultimately the municipality, like everyone in the municipality, is paying when you don't take care of these, and they're not, it's not a yes or no, it's yes and. We can do these things, and we can do these things in a way that preserves the dignity for everybody involved. So those are my thoughts on what kind of policy impact, and training is big. Again, it's narrative and how police talk about the things that they're doing in the community too. I think Elgin is a great example of, they have really great community, they have community programs, but those police are embedded in Black and brown communities, and they're not Black and brown police always. So if I'm, I don't have a great relationship with you, and now you're moving in my neighborhood, do you know what I mean? And I'm already policed more by you. What are the narratives and the things that you're perpetuating by doing that? And that's why you want a racial equity lens on things, so that you can say who's burdened by this, who might be inadvertently, right? Because I don't think ever it's the police's intent to do those things, but when you don't monitor who's getting hurt by it or who's burdened by it, that's when you get unintended consequences.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I do want to throw in a question that we got emailed to us from one of our constituents. I want to thank Linda for this question. The question asked about disproportionate traffic stops for Black and Latinx residents. Is there anything being done at the municipal or state level to address this? What can constituents ask of their local police departments about this issue? And since that means municipal, I'm going to start with you again, Trustee Porter.
Yeah, that question came up during our town hall as well, about the inordinate number of traffic stops. And as we delved into that, we found out that there is quite a significant amount of data that is kept to record traffic stops in terms of the demographics for the ethnic makeup, the racial makeup of people that are involved in traffic stops. And that information is also recorded and is available. What I think needs to happen is that we have to put that information forward so that the public has access to it on a regular basis, and not just in times of crisis, so that we can actually look at and examine the data. Now, to go beyond that, why is that happening? I think it goes again to the issue of implicit bias. There is a bias that exists that we are just now coming to recognize and realize is a significant issue in our communities. And as Denise has stated, there's a ton of training that everyone has been submitted to that is supposed to help address the issue of implicit bias. What I'm afraid of, though, is that though we've had people who have been in compliance with attending the implicit bias training models, what has not happened is that there's not been a change of mind, and there's not been a change of attitude. And so you can, like many of us who went to college, there were some courses that weren't our favorites, and we attended, we showed up, we took the test, and we passed, but we didn't really learn the lessons from those courses. We just needed to pass them in order to get to where we needed to go. And I think that in many cases, we have people that are attending the implicit bias courses and those trainings, but I'm starting to question whether there has really been a change of heart and a change of mind with the implicit bias, because it is still showing up in many communities as evidenced by the feeling of traffic stops and being inordinately geared and directed toward minorities. That question did come up, and I know that personally, we've all, well, most minorities, myself, have experienced driving through a community and having the police follow me for a few blocks, and I know they're running the plates and they're doing all of those things, and it just seems to happen with some regularity out in the northwest suburbs. So yeah, it is an issue, and I think the bias, we have to continue to push for that, but we also got to examine the data. And when we find these instances where we can document that it's happening, then we must address the officers that are involved, that are, you know, doing these type of activities, and then maybe do some redirection in terms of their training, and address those issues live while they're still pertinent and still, you know, active.
No, I think those are some incredible points. You know, I've often wondered too, whether or not that data is being recorded, and you know what the propensity and the racial makeup between ticketing or giving a warning, and how that could be looked at to better see if there's disproportionate effects, which I believe we all kind of internally recognize is probably happening. And that's a good point about the bias trainings. I've often thought of how those could be spiced up to be more interactive, so people have to actually get in the groove of those trainings and participate in a more active manner, and maybe that will have more of an effect. Senator Castro, with the same question, what are you hearing about potential state policy on this?
So I think, you know, I'm going to touch on Herb's point of implicit bias. Implicit bias doesn't also impact folks in policing. Implicit bias impacts folks in healthcare. So I've worked a lot I have a maternal mortality bill, and I've worked with a lot of different doctors from across the state. We expanded access to post care after birth from 60 days to 12 months, the only state in the nation to do that. But one of the things when working with different doctors, you see people, a doctor telling me the story, and we see it, right? And I remember, you know, caring for my elderly Latina mom and going to a new doctor, and the immediate reaction you get from a receptionist or from a nurse, just not even knowing, they just rush to judgment. And one of the things that one of these doctors who dealt with that, saying this is a big issue that we need to address, because I literally did an unscientific survey where I watched, I sat back and watched with my daughter, who was 9, she said, my daughter at the 9, and we were watching how this receptionist interacted with people of color. And even my daughter recognized, well, why did you ask questions like, why did that person, you know, that African American or that Latina woman get treated different than that white woman? Again, people don't realize that there is a bias there, that they're like, well, I don't, you know, I'm not biased, I don't do that, but you know, just a little nuance. And you know, to Trustee Porter, I remember leaving my mom's house in Elgin, and literally I was with a girlfriend. We literally went a block when I was pulled over, and they're like, "Why are you in this neighborhood? What are you doing here?" And I was just kind of like, "My mom lives there." Oh, okay. Well, can I have your driver's license? So it was like they just stopped me because I just looked out of place, and I kind of like, no reason to stop. So it happens, right? There is those things. And I think from a state standpoint, I think we are looking at more transparency. Like, how does that, to your point, Kevin, like, yes, why are Black and brown folks being pulled over more often? But also more detailed information, like, what are they being pulled over? What was the reason? Was it a tail light? Were they speeding? What resulted in that? I think more transparency is a good thing, but also, as Trustee Porter said, making it available to the public and in a place where it can be found, not buried. We shouldn't wait for reporters to do FOIA requests and constantly pester to get that information. You've seen a lot of reports. ProPublica has done a lot of different reports on that. I think the more transparency, the better, and that helps the citizens ask tough questions. These are tough conversations, and I'm happy we're having them. If people feel uncomfortable about these conversations, they should, because they're not easy conversations, but they're much needed conversations.
You know, and if I could just jump back in, one of the things with implicit bias is that it's not always obvious that a person is harboring thoughts of implicit bias. And so, you know, to screen it out becomes very difficult to screen for implicit bias. And I think, again, to one of the points that was made earlier, community policing would go a long way toward resolving this issue, because the way that you get rid of implicit bias is that you have to have people who are common and knowledgeable about the behaviors, the attitudes, the cultures, the mores of the people that they're policing. So if you live next door, and if you're policing a Black community and you live in a Black community and you know what they're all about, and you understand that they have the same values and same concerns, same needs, and same struggles as anyone else, then that helps to erode the implicit bias. So implicit bias can't be trained away. I think it's got to be experienced away, and it's got to be an experience. You can't train it away, in my opinion, because we've been doing it for years and it still exists.
Yes.
And I want to pile on to that because that's the whole I have a Black friend thing, right? And here's the danger in that too, because it depends on where your Black friend is from and what their frame of reference is. Now, I lived in McHenry County for 14 years. Of course, everyone wanted to put me on everything. I'm used to sitting in a room with white people. I know how to switch and code and understand what things I need to do to get things done in those kinds of rooms. Now, there are people in my family who are just as brilliant, who are just as smart. You can't, but they would not be someone that would be asked. I think bias has a lot of, and like the other thing I like to tell people is bias is on a continuum, right? Bias is on a continuum of helpful bias all the way to harmful bias. Bias helps us make decisions. And so that's the other part of this that I also really like to bring home to people. You can be biased all day, but if your bias, like my bias isn't going to materially hurt very many people. Okay, because I'm not in a position of power. But if you in some areas, but when you have a bias that can decide people's freedom or not their freedom, or take their life or not take their life, that's when and it can't be trained away. And Herb, I'm totally with you. And part of it, there's a lot of training things that are going on right now, especially because of virtual, where we're talking about augmented reality and virtual reality. Because, part of the problem is that people don't know what it's like to be in Black skin. Okay. So if we were able to train you in a way where you knew what it was like to feel like you're intimidated because you walk into a room, if you knew what it was like to have people locking their doors, like, and I've been a contributor to that, because I do think that virtual reality, that augmented reality, it takes it away from cerebral and it makes it actually, you know what I mean? It can stick. So we'll see, but I'm with you, Herb. The idea of training away bias and hoping to change people's hearts. I mean, let me just say this, and I can say this with all certainty. If it could have been done, Black women would have figured it out and we would have been doing it already, right? So it isn't gonna just be something. So, well, I mean, you're laughing, but if it were up to us, this shit would be solved. So because it's not like that, right? I mean, because it doesn't work like that, you know what I mean? It's much bigger than that. And it's also, last thing, and this transitions us actually to the next question. This is also like, this can't just be legislated away. Okay, because we have laws on the books today in lots of places that we don't enforce, that we do not enforce equally across the board. And that's where, I laugh at Kevin's point about ticketing versus warnings. Early in my life, I always got the ticket. Period. My Blacktail and Sleepy Hollow, I went to college in Judson and Elgin. So I know the Northwest suburbs. I always got the ticket in Sleepy Hollow, while my roommates, who also worked at Spring Hill Mall, who also drove the same routes I drove, never got stopped. And so, but I tell you what, do I get the tickets now? I don't. Because when I get stopped, I have a different level of experience, and I don't, and so that, like, what we're doing too is we're taking too much responsibility off of the officers. We're taking too much responsibility and we're putting it on the people, and that's not where it should be. And I think that leads me to, okay, yes, we can't completely legislate it away, but we do have laws right now. And one of the things that I have been perplexed about is government tends to be perpetuators of unjust policies, because we're making decisions about economic development without making sure that all the different parties that are involved are at the table. And having people at the table isn't enough either. It's also, you know, running the scenarios, right? Like I was in a conversation right before this about, you know, policy that someone was looking at for Humboldt Park. And and one of the things that kept going through my head was, well, you know, there's specific questions that you can ask about impact of this and what are the intersections of things that might be affected by this. Because if you don't ask them at the front end of these policies being made, once they're baked, it's too late. So what are some policies that any of you have seen around racial justice that you've seen brought up in other areas, right? Maybe in, you know, in other states or municipalities that we might see here in Illinois?
So I guess I'll start. I think one of the things before I jump into that, and I have a few examples that I pulled up, but Denise, to your point, I think when you talk about, you either have a seat at the table or you're on the menu, right? And when you stepped up and served on different boards and commissions in McHenry County, my thing is this, and this goes to everyone across the state, is people can tout, you have leaders who tout diversity, but yet their boards, commissions, their councils, their, you know, do not reflect it. And so for me, my challenge to everyone on right now is wherever you live, you should apply to be on different commissions and councils and whatnot. You should run for public office. In order to have a voice, you have to be at the table, right? You have, as you go back to the policies and making the decisions and how those get formulated, you know, Trustee Porter is able to bring a different perspective than someone else, than me, than other people that are on his on the village board, right? And I think having more voices that are diverse in all backgrounds is important and imperative. And a lot of things that I hear from folks is, well, I can't find anybody. I can't find this. I'm like, how hard are you looking?
Well,
Because I'm sure there's
who are you asking, and where
that
are you,
too.
where are you asking the question?
And I'll, you know, ask a different folks. I mean, it's great that you were always on a lot of these, you know, committees, but are there others that could be on there as well that can bring a different perspective? See, and that's the thing that I want to challenge and I push hard on. You know, when you look at corporate boards, what are they made up of? White men. You know, and Chris Welch had a bill that's addressing that. There's a study that came out, and you see some of those reports being filed. They're horrible. So it goes back to, we have to push to have a seat at the table, and then we also have to respond when we don't have that seat at the table, right? Whether it's voting someone out, whether it's not buying their product. So that's a whole different conversation on the social economic. But back to the police reform, you know, so I did pull up some of the policies that I've seen other states have done. Colorado had a police reform bill, and and so it is called an enhanced law enforcement integrity bill. It addresses body cameras, and it puts criminal penalties on folks who turn off or manipulate the body cameras. The use of force, chokeholds and carotid chokeholds, which is like when they put pressure on, you know, the carotid artery and restrict blood flow to the brain. That's been banned. You know, failure to intervene in situations when they see someone overstepping their bounds. Fired cops, any officer who was found guilty or used excessive force or failing to intervene will lose their officer certification permanently, so they can't go work somewhere else. I think that's some of the things that you see is, you know, and I hear this from my council members, if there's someone that oversteps a line and they fire them, they're allowed to come back. They can arbitrate, and sometimes the arbitrator can let them come back. And so when they're trying as a municipality to address the issue, they can't, because they feel like they've done everything right, yet arbitration has allowed them to come back. And these are people who have truly violated and done bad things. So they obviously, Colorado also abolished qualified immunity. And so that's some of the examples of, and that's one. I mean, I also pulled up the city of Minneapolis and what they have done. But these are part of the conversations that are ongoing to reform how the police department and bring about transparency and reform, much needed, right? And there are, again, I keep saying this, they are difficult conversations and people should be uncomfortable about it. But you know what? People are tired. One of the, if COVID has just really highlighted and brought out what has been in existence for decades upon decades, years upon years. And people are just tired
Well,
of
and
the
I think
social
it's
inequities.
the same people have been saying things for years. I think what I hear, I 100% like co-sign on most of everything you said. The one thing I will say is not everybody's going to run for office, right? Because I lost a lot running for office, like my marriage. I moved. Like I'm telling you, when Black people step up, white people step up too. And you can Google my name for this week or this week 5 years ago when I moved away from Lake in the Hills and see the stories that were written and the things that people said. And so I don't encourage everyone to get in it, because when you get in it, you're putting yourself out there. What I do encourage is I encourage us to find people that are brave enough and can do it and support those people, right? Like people love to talk about how much they wanted me to run, but people weren't writing checks and people weren't, coming out and supporting. And so I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is it's on the committees and the people that run committees to go and find people. Why did I run for office in Lake in the Hills? Because I have been a volunteer for Parks and Rec for like 6 years. I never once knew there was a commission, never once was asked to be on a commission, even though I was giving tons of hours. So I feel like it's often said to put it on the communities to figure out how to get there. And I'm saying, no, put it on the institutions to figure out how to communicate and to invite folks. I came to Evanston and right away, the first thing I did was let everyone know I was there, let them know I was engaged. And guess what? I got all the calls. And so one of the things I've now started to do is how do I find people? And I think about one of the state things I'm assigned to right now. I'm looking for my successor. I'm looking for somebody to replace me, but I want them to be a Latino from Kane County, because I've watched this committee for the last 7 years. I was a Black person from McHenry County who's now in Cook, but how do you have a business enterprise program for the state of Illinois and not have a Latino business owner from Kane County? Right? You know what I mean? So that I made that my job, but I don't think that's my job. That's CMS's job and the folks who are recruiting for those kinds of, positions. And people need to, because that's a governor, you're approved by the governor. So it's our job to be feeding folks to JB to appoint to those things.
So,
well, now that you brought that up, I am the state senator that covers both Kane and Cook. So you and I need to talk about that if they can't find a Latino business owner. But
yeah,
to your
I'm trying to
quick
roll
point
off
about,
and they won't let me.
But to go on to your quick point about running for office, I think a lot of us, especially in communities of color, are waiting to be asked. I didn't wait to be asked to run for state senate. I didn't wait to be asked to run for county board, because if I waited to be asked, I was never going to get asked.
Exactly.
And so, but I hear your point. You are putting yourself on the line when it comes to that, when you run for office, because yes, everything and anything, you will be treated differently as a person of color running for office versus a non-person of color. Everything in your background comes out. And
Absolutely.
You're right. And that's why you don't see more folks of color
that's right.
running. But they should.
We have to talk about this, Christina. We need, and Herb, like I know you want the floor. We have to talk about this because people don't know. And it's too late once you've turned those signatures in.
Right.
You know what I would say too is that being an elected official is only one level of involvement. What I would like to see is some of the enthusiasm that has been demonstrated by some of the demonstrations that have gone on throughout our area to show up at some of the local meetings, to show up at municipality board meetings, to show up at county board meetings, because that's where you can also make your voice heard. So it's not only the elected official that can do it, and certainly that's important, but I would love to see that energy that was displayed at some of our demonstrations to come to our municipal board meetings and express those concerns and make your voices known, because that's where you'll have real impact. And so I would encourage, what are some of the things that we can do? If you have a problem with policing, and if there have been those type of issues where you feel that you've been stopped in an inordinate amount, in an inordinate fashion, then come to a board meeting. Come to a board meeting and state that for the record. Get that on the record. We can have the police chief immediately do an investigation to look into that. The board members are now aware and have been advised that this is an issue in their community, and can begin to dig deeper into looking into that issue and then seeing if there's something that needs to be addressed and dealt with. So community involvement, I think that what COVID has done is that it has awakened us to the impact of being involved as a community. And I would like to see that extend to our municipal board meetings, to our county board meetings, to people showing up and making their voices known in an official capacity.
Hey, I was beating that drum. People need to write their mayors, add their voice into our local governments. Come to our county board meetings. Everything's virtual now, so it's even easier to participate. You do it in your own home.
Actually,
but we had a question from Roberto, and I know this was directed at Denise. It was about affirmative action and whether or not federal guidelines have to be used at the municipal and township levels. Senator Castro, you might have better knowledge of what the policies here in the state are. Herb, you probably have some insight on this as well. I've heard this a lot, that we're not getting people of color to apply. But I guess the question is, are those municipal governments actively going into those communities and trying to collect applications? So Denise, if you want to answer that first, and then we could go around the horn.
Yeah. So when I was doing some work for Elgin specifically, I looked at the top 15 communities in the state of Illinois for contracts, because I think what he was talking about has to do with contracting. Federal contracts have certain levels and limits, and then locally, he's talking about in equal employment opportunity, which is different because that has to do with hiring. So I can't address the hiring part of it. Sorry. Because I can tell you, on a municipal level, some of them have local ordinances related to this, but as a whole, again, when I looked to try to help Elgin set up their framework, there's not, in the state of Illinois, there is not a lot of consistency around that. So you're right, Robert. Everyone, the federal is the basis, but the data and census stuff actually helps inform, because federally, that, Elgin, I think about Elgin, since we're picking on Elgin today, there's 100,000 people there, and 30% of them are Latino. And if we look at what Elgin's they're all of their employees, it doesn't necessarily reflect that. And I don't think there's a way to federally, they have to be intentional about trying to remedy it, but I don't know that there's a way to legislatively get that done. Herb, have you, anybody else around the horn?
Christina, you want to go ahead, and then I'll chime in?
Yeah. So I think one of the things when you talk about it, you can't legislate it, but what you can is do shine a light to it. So I'll use an example at the state level, members of the Latino and Black caucus, and as well as the Asian caucus, highlight and push CMS on hiring numbers. So when you look at, I'll give an example. When you look at the state population for Latinos is 16%, and the state only has, I think, 6%.
Yeah.
There's a problem. And so we constantly push different departments. We're like, okay, and when you compare it to other minority groups, they do a little better, but they could be better. And they're not necessarily in positions of power. So that's where you get the Latino caucus pushing, and the different caucuses pushing hard on that, because you want to see that diversity, especially with a diverse state. When you look at municipalities, when you look at minority contracting, Elgin's horrible. And
they're not horrible.
I think it's horrible. Let's just put it this way. When we did transportation hearing in Elgin, and that came up, and it was not very good.
Well,
and
they are now
several
tracking
members.
data better, because you got to be able to track the data, right? Like they were on but that part of this too is driven by systems, right?
Mhm.
If you don't have ways to track and know, you know, I looked at the top 15 communities in the state
Mhm.
about contracting, and only like 3 of them have actual policies about it, right?
And
that's like
I think that's important.
Yeah.
And that's important, is the policy. And I think the state has tried to set policy and guide that discussion, so that way more, when you talk about these issues, there's a lot. There's also police reform, but there's also the opportunities. People want the opportunities to do business with the state, or have an opportunity to be successful, whether they're a small business and opportunity. The doors of navigating bureaucracies are very difficult. And so when you look at all levels of government, not necessarily just the state, whether it's municipal, whether it's universities, whether you keep going, it is imperative that we push on those issues. And when we had the transportation hearing, NIU admitted they could do a lot better in accessing more minority contracting. They had improved, but they weren't where they were, because they knew that question was going to be brought up given the makeup of the transportation committee. And where I was going with Elgin had said they were doing very well, and then kind of stepped in it when, the person asked the question, well, what's your statistics? Well, 10%. What is the city made up of? And so didn't realize they stepped in it. And again, I think those are policies we need to address. But I will say this: you see different institutions, higher ed institutions in particular. I was part of higher ed, and the fight to get more people of color to be hired, to be considered at all levels, especially at the administrative level, cabinet level, was always we can't find them.
Right.
And that's why I go back, well, how
Yeah.
hard are you looking?
Yeah.
Because you're not looking hard enough. And then they get in the door, but the barrier for them to get past level 1 of the interview has been so stacked against them that they never make it to round 2 or 3. So those are really, again, tough conversations we need to have, but it's happening. And Herb, you were going to say something to that extent. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, I agree with what's been said. I know that we're having discussions now about our hiring practices and why there seems to be a difficult time in hiring African American officers to our police department. But I think we've got to be intentional about what we're trying to do. And one of the things that has happened, and I'm probably kicking over a sacred cow now, is that we've overused the term minority hires. And so that includes a whole broad subset of different groups, so that an organization can be in compliance with minority hiring, but not have any African Americans represented in their employee base, or maybe not have any Asians that are represented in the employee base, or Hispanics. So I think that what we got to do is be intentional and say that we need a number of African Americans that are on this police report, not just minorities, because they throw everything.
White women
Yes.
are minority.
White women,
are
everything
protected
goes
class.
into this, and it counts. And so they can proudly say, well, we meet the minority requirements, and because we have generalized what minorities comes to represent. And if we're not intentional about hiring African Americans, Black officers to patrol and police Black communities, we'll never get there. So I think there's got to be a focus on that, and get away from overgeneralizing the concept of minority hiring. We are having that discussion in Hanover Park. They say that it's hard to find candidates, and so we're looking into why is that, because I've talked to my relatives and friends in Chicago, and they tell me, look, I can give you a number of people with clean police records who would love to come out and work for your police department and make the kind of money that you guys are paying out there. So they don't understand why there's this disconnect, and we're trying to help resolve that problem.
Well, and
so
that
you
also
touch
speaks.
I was going to say, he touches on a little bit of an interesting topic. So that's one career path, right? But there are a lot of jobs out here in the northwest suburbs, a lot. And public transportation is horrible between, you know, the city of Chicago, out here. And I heard a story from a gentleman in Schaumburg who said he had a gentleman who lived on the far south side of Chicago who would take several buses, a train, and
Yeah.
literally would
Yes.
commute an hour and a half in rain, sleet, or snow to get to his job. And he said, because it's a job that helps him achieve some of the dreams that he wants to achieve. So the fact of the matter, this is where we all, you know, this runs beyond just the collar counties or the suburbs. We all need to work with our brothers and sisters in the city to say, hey, how do we help those folks come out here to get jobs? Because there's a lot of work out here. There's a lot
Absolutely.
of opportunity. I can tell you, I don't know how many job openings I've seen, but you know, you always get, when you talk about public transit, there's always this fight for money, whether it's a fight between RTA, PACE, Metra,
Mm-hmm.
because there's such a limited pot of dollars that they're all trying to fight for it. And I think we need to be smart and rethink how we get access for those communities, and for folks even here in our communities who cannot navigate or get to a job, whether it's in St. Charles, if they're in Elgin, it's in St. Charles. Well, there's not a lot of bus service that way. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that, again, it goes back to, this is a big, broader conversation. You call it social economic development, and different things that we really need to have.
Well, and I would add that it, you know, it also, we're talking about bias in hiring in terms of, like, even the fact that when you say we want diverse candidates, people say, well, they have to be qualified or I can't find them. You know, that's part of the, and I don't, and I mean, by the way, I started a film company, and I say that because media helps feed, like, none of us work in a vacuum, right? We live in surround sound. So policymakers are influenced by media too. And I, like, every time, I don't cringe when somebody says I'm looking for somebody qualified. I'm like, why don't you say that in general? Because as many white
Mm-hmm.
people are not qualified for jobs that we call them in, and all kinds of stuff. So it's like, part of it is getting people to be anti-racist and getting people to build the skill set to challenge some of these myths and some of these narratives. And that, you know, we didn't get to that question, but that's why not being not racist isn't enough. Because when those conversations are happening, if we're not able, like, when somebody says something to me about black on black crime, I immediately quote the stat about white people. I immediately quote, why do you say that? Where did you hear that? Because what I'm trying to do is help people unlearn all the stuff that they've learned. Because people in this country have learned that only white people are qualified, only white people lead. And that is not true. What it is there's lots of us leading. We don't always have the visibility. We don't always have the platforms. And so part of it is getting armies of people to be able to have the language to challenge some of these things that get said. I love when somebody says the thing about, black people commit more crime, and that's why they, or why didn't he comply? Well, we can show you videos. White people don't comply too, and they don't end up dead. Right. So, and the other thing I say, I was at a march last week where somebody said, oh, well, white people get killed by the police too. And I said, and when a white person gets killed by police, their family has a shot at justice, right? There, some way, shape, or form, it's a very different process. And how do we make sure that those processes are the same? And remind people of when they're not. So clearly we have to have a part 2 of this.
Yes. Well, and it's funny that you bring that up, because I talked about, there was an institution that had an opening that a woman of color stepped down. She was an African American woman. She had to step down for personal reasons, and many of us encouraged several folks to apply of color, because it should have been replaced to a person of color, hopefully an African American. But in the end, a bunch of names were submitted of all different minority backgrounds, and they ended up not choosing a person of color. They chose a white male. And so when I questioned some of the trustees on that, and they said, well, they weren't qualified. And I said, what? Excuse me? I said they weren't qualified. And I said that is the age-old adage for anyone of color, that they have to have a higher standard. And I said, so what made them not qualified? Of course, when I pressed that issue, they couldn't answer me. And I was like, okay, so you're playing into a bias. That person ended up not running, but and the fact of the matter is, it's harder, as we have said, for a person of color to run for office that have stepped up. When you see those types of things happening, we have to call them out.
Yes.
And we have to be active to call it out and say, why did you do that? And people don't like you said, people don't realize they do it, and then they have to step back and think. Again, it's okay to make people uncomfortable and to challenge the thought process respectfully with dialogue, to say, look, I for a fact know several people who applied, and they told me they applied, but they weren't
Right.
even given the courtesy of an interview.
Right.
And they're very well qualified folks. But that qualification should apply to everybody.
Well, I think the other call out, call in. That's right. The other thing is being a Black woman who's outspoken in the way I am, I actually try to stay curious, right? Even if I know what you're saying is some horse shit, I still sit there and go, okay, well, where did you learn that? And the reason I'm serious about that, because people don't like to be judged. And guess what? For the first time in their lives, white people are being challenged, and they are being judged, and they are being lumped in. So they can't take it because they aren't as resilient as us, or even gay folks who have had to be labeled or whatever. And so I like to take a curious stance and really help them with, where did you learn that? What experiences have you had that tell you that? Because when you say it like that, that's exactly right, Christina. They have to stop back and go, well, I don't really have any experience, right? That's, you know what I mean? Or I don't really have a real reason for saying that. Like, that's just something I heard from my parents, or that's just the way my peers say, you know? And so it's staying curious and keeping an inquisitive stance and trying, I am judging you. Guess what? Because I'm a Scorpio and I'm a Gen X. I'm judging you all day, every day. However, you're not going to know I'm judging you when we're talking, okay? Because I'm going to keep it at a level that we can continue a dialogue, right? Because I want everybody to get where I am, and I want everyone to get where we are around this table. And we're not going to get them there. You know, we got to call them out, but we got to make sure. And it's, I'm not saying they got to be fragile, but what I'm making the point of helping them critically think, because that's the reason they're in that spot. They haven't been critically thinking. They've just been absorbing.
And that's one of those things, you have to break down those barriers, because racism also exists within communities of color as well. I can tell you, Latinos
We can have a
in
whole
particular.
another town hall about that.
Yes, and I think for like folks, I push back on even folks within mine, my community, to say, well, why do you say that? And again, sitting back and listening, and then turning around and educating or asking probing questions. Well, and I think it happens in all communities, and we all should unite, because these are issues that impact everyone of color.
Right.
And we should fight this together, versus, I always say, all together is better than fighting over crumbs.
Well, and if we did, we're outnumbering them soon. I mean, that's part of what this is all about. Let's just be real. The census keeps telling us. I can remember when I first got out of college, it was by 2050 or whatever. And that number keeps coming up, because the number of white kids born versus the number of non-white kids born for the last 10 years, you know what I mean? And so eventually you're not even going to have a choice, right? Like, eventually this is good. But so we have to start preparing everybody and making sure that we're growing leaders across. And I'm with you 100%. Like, the more of these conversations we have, the better. And we have to invite, everyone to be part of them. And I just am thankful that Commissioner Morrison put this together. I'm
100%. We're going to need more of these conversations. For one, I want to thank everyone who was watching this live and participating in the conversation and asking really great questions. I'm sorry we did not get to all those questions. I have so much. For one, I think about often, how do we put pressure on our local news to not only cover Black on Black crime,
or even say it
in Chicago? They don't go out and cover when Commissioner Dennis Deere does a big event handing out COVID-19 masks to his constituents, or when they're doing events like that. Those aren't being covered by local news, but the crime is. And so how do we put pressure on our local media to show the beautiful stories going within communities of color and get those stories out to the public, because those are just as important and they help change people's mindset. Because I think often, you know, my grandma's always at home watching local news and all she sees is crime. And
Right.
not everything I see, because I'm out there and I'm trying to, you know, have a diverse net and see what's going on in different communities. And I'm trying to learn about that lived experience. I do want to shout out, we just did something historic in Cook County. For example, we just appointed 2 people to the RTA board. Now, there has never been a woman of color on that board. And originally there were conversations about the Southland choosing a highly qualified white woman to fill the Southland seat. Ultimately, we chose a Black woman for that seat in the north suburbs. We have MB Canty that just got appointed. She's a mixed woman of color as well. And so now there will be 2 women of color going to the RTA board for the first time, diversifying that 15-member board that only has 3 people of color on it out of 15. And so it's important. You know, we had only white commissioners in the north suburbs who helped make that choice to choose a woman of color. And it's important to get those voices onto those commissions and to talk about the need for equity and having those voices at the table, especially when it comes to public transportation, which I'm very—
Who uses public transportation? Like when you look at the data of who's
Right.
using it.
So if I could, Kevin, just my last little comment. I think that what these town halls do and what these discussions do, and ultimately what they need to do, is that they need to make all of the institutions uncomfortable. When they get together and have their meetings and they look around and they see that it is a majority white male organization, they can't be comfortable in those surroundings anymore. We've got to make them uncomfortable, and so that when they look around and say, this has to change. We can't continue on like this. Where is the diversity in this committee? Where is the diversity on this board? And until they become uncomfortable, then they will not be intentional about hiring and resolving those issues. So these kind of discussions, and I'm so thankful that you hosted this, because it's the beginning. It's the beginning of a long course of discussions that we need to have. We're looking at racism that has existed for over 400 years, that has been institutionalized in our society. And, thankfully, COVID has ripped the scab off of it, and we're now having to face and to deal with it. But it's going to be a long, hard, difficult process. And there's going to be some screaming and some shouting and some hurt feelings and a lot of those things. But we're going to have to endure that in order to get through and hopefully see some answers and to see some of these issues resolved for the betterment, as I like to say, as we try to move toward a more perfect union.
I love that, Herb. You know, that plays along with one of my favorite quotes. It's a Frederick Douglass quote. Agitate, agitate, agitate. That's something I try to live by. I want to thank everyone. This panel is great. We need to continue this conversation. I am humbled to have the friendship of you 3. Herb, thank you for being here. Christina, Denise, I want to give you a final moment to say some last thoughts, and we definitely need to continue this conversation. Christina.
So I'm so grateful to be here. And I guess what I would leave us with is all of this starts in our own lives, right? So everyone around here talked about how we speak up or whatever. So let me put out a resource that you who's watching, whether you're watching on the replay or watching live, the Anti-Defamation League has a personal assessment of anti-bias behavior questionnaire, and it's about 15 questions, but it's so good because it helps you look at those things that Christina, Herb, and myself and Commissioner Morrison were talking about, of where bias comes in and we don't even know it's happening. And again, I just think if we can start to be aware, because it starts with us, like we're the institutions, right? Kevin's sitting on this board, on this commission, the board of commissioners with all these other people. And it's like, if we can get people individually to start to understand and grasp these issues and understand why it's good for everybody when we do equity, right? Because then you catch all the people. Like, I always laugh. It's like whenever people feel like the United States is a pie, and that if we give a portion to this group, then this group's going to be hungry. This is an abundant nation, and there is enough for everyone. And if we can start to lift, it really is true. All the boats lift each other. So go out to the Anti-Defamation League and get that personal assessment for anti-bias behavior as a start before you get into the conversation again.
And I got one final announcement. On July 22nd, we will be hosting our second town hall, co-sponsored with the DuPage County NAACP. You will find that information. Will be soon posting the links for that. It was a Zoom meeting, so we encourage everyone who wants to continue this discussion on July 22nd at 6:00 p.m. We will be hosting Piece Together Our Community Round 2.
Thank you, Herb.
Excellent. Thank
Christina,
you.
And I
any
think-
other thoughts?
I think I'm going to echo a lot of the conversations that we've had here. This has been a great conversation. I think to piggyback of what Herb was talking about, it's okay to have uncomfortable conversations, but it's also okay to educate. I think one of the things is, like, you have a lot of folks who just don't understand what it's like to walk in those shoes because they're not a person of color. So don't quickly criticize. Take that as a moment to educate someone about what some of the barriers and things that you have faced or you have seen family faced, or even walk them into those shoes. I think there are colleagues who have met with some of the Black Caucus and have gone out to their communities to help and learned about and get to know one another to see and understand what they're facing. I think you would have a new appreciation and understanding. But I think these are tough conversations for a lot of folks, and it's okay to have these tough conversations, but it's also, don't forget to educate and teach and learn and give it a moment to help change that tide in that course of conversation. So I'm happy that we were able to have this conversation, and you're right, Kevin, we should continue it as we go along.
No, we definitely do. Again, thank you three so very much for taking part in this. This was an incredible conversation, and I look forward to getting to some more of the questions as we continue these discussions moving forward. We do need to keep working on bringing better equity to our communities, and it's an honor to work with you three. Thank you so much, everyone who tuned in, and anyone who posts questions, who watched the video of this, will get you answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.